The EV road tax has been announced, and I think it's a massive misstep from the government. So this is what it says. In 2028 to 29, the charge will equal 3 pence per mile for battery electric cars and 1.5 pence per mile for plug-in hybrid cars, with the rate per mile increasing annually with the consumer price index. So the average person drives around 7,000 miles a year. So that would make the EV road tax, called eVED, for an average EV driver, £210. And that's on top of the existing £195 road tax drivers have to pay as well. So that means it's cheaper to tax some diesels than an EV. But does that mean it's cheaper to run a diesel than an EV? Let's dig into it. And I'll also say why, although I'm despairing inside, I have reason to be hopeful. This video is sponsored by eVision Electric Vehicles, the UK's first and largest all-electric vehicle hire company. Okay, so although this is clearly a political issue, I'm not going to get too political in this video. I'll talk about the facts and my opinion, and I'll leave the politics to you in the comments. If you watch this video and you end up liking it, then please press that subscribe button and the like button and press the bell icon as well. It all helps massively for this channel, so thank you very much if you do. Right, let's dive in. So just a bit of background first, and then I'll get into my thoughts. In the UK, drivers have to pay a yearly road tax. That's called vehicle excise duty. And this is a tax that goes towards keeping our roads well maintained. Not really, of course. It's just money that goes into a big pot and that gets spent on public services. Some of that goes into the roads, not much. Up until the 1st of April 2025, EV drivers had been paying nothing at all. Now we pay £10 in the first year, £195 thereafter. Any EVs older than the 31st of March 2017 just pay £20 a year. Now, EV drivers in cars costing over £40,000 purchased after the 1st of April 2025 also have to pay an expensive car supplement, which was £425 from the 2nd to the 6th year. The expensive car supplement had been criticised as unfair since EVs tend to cost around £8,000 to £10,000 more expensive than their petrol equivalents. So thankfully, they've seen sense and they've raised it to £50,000 from April 2026. So that's some good news. So back to the pay per mile tax. The government want more money, specifically from EV drivers. And why is this? Because the government make money from petrol and diesel sales, money that is getting less and less every year, as so many of us can now refuel at home. There's a fuel duty and VAT on fuel sales, which means that the government make around 25 to 30 billion pounds every year just from people filling up their cars at the forecourts. So there's the problem. The government want us to be green, but somehow they need to replace the money that they're making on selling fossil fuel. It's a bit like making a fortune selling cigarettes, despite knowing the negative effect it has on the country's health. The government are addicted to the tax revenue. So, pay per mile road tax. There had been speculation recently prompted by a report in the famously anti-EV, anti-green tech rag, The Telegraph, that the government were due to unleash a 3 pence per mile road tax just on EVs. And it turns out that was completely accurate. And a lot of people, myself included, thought that it was so stupid it would never happen. Surely the government wouldn't be so short-sighted. Well, it is. So how will it work? I'm not convinced the government actually know how it'll work. And I'm also not convinced that it's even going to happen, but I'll get onto that later. Remember, we're talking about 2028. This is supposed to happen, which is shortly before the next general election. So everything could change. But that's what makes all of this even more ridiculous. So you'll have to estimate your annual mileage. You'll pay that amount, and then you'll get your mileage checked at your next MOT. The difference would then be paid by you, or if you're under, then it will roll on to the next year. For new cars that don't get MOT'd, you'll have to take the car into a workshop to get the mileage checked, which will be free. You won't have to pay for that. But that's still hassle, isn't it, right? We need stability. Why this is so incredibly stupid, I think, is that we should be encouraging people to drive more in an EV, not combustion engines. People doing massive distances will be penalised if they do it in an EV, especially if they have to rely on public charging, which, as we all know, is extremely expensive in the UK. And announcing this now just gives ammunition to people who don't like EVs, don't want us to drive EVs, or people who are on the fence about getting an EV. This is what the Office for Budget Responsibility report says. The new charge is expected to raise £1.1 billion in 2028 to 29, rising to £1.9 billion in 2030 to 2031. The yield from the measure is uncertain, as it is dependent on the uptake of electric vehicles over the next 5 years. The government's zero-emission vehicle, the ZEV mandate, requires EVs to make up an increasing minimum proportion of total manufacturers' sales over the next 5 years, reaching 80% in 2030. This new charge is likely to reduce demand for electric cars as it increases their lifetime cost. That's honest, at least. To meet the mandate, manufacturers would therefore need to respond through lowering prices or reducing sales of non-EV vehicles. Like manufacturers don't have it hard enough. Overall, as a result of this measure, we estimate there will be around 440,000 fewer electric car sales across the forecast period relative to the pre-measures forecast, with 130,000 of this offset by the expected increase in sales due to other budget measures. How ridiculous. Now, it's worth saying that if you can charge at home, and the majority can in the UK, the vast majority of people would still find an EV cheaper to run. Time for some maths. Let's say you're a sales rep and you drive a lot, 15,000 miles a year. Doing that in an EV would mean a road tax of £645. So that's the normal road tax of £195 plus this new eVED, which would be £450. VED has gone up for combustion engine cars as well, and it's based on the CO2 emissions. A popular diesel in the UK is a Volkswagen Golf TDI, and that's got CO2 emissions of 115 grams per kilometre. So the VED for that Golf would be £440 in the first year and then £195 in subsequent years. But if you're relying on motorway public charging, like GridServe, at a cost of 82 pence per kilowatt hour, and you're not savvy enough or can't be bothered to charge at Tesla superchargers or get a subscription with a network like Ionity, then if you're relying on those GridServe chargers, you'll be paying about 20 pence per mile. That's £3,000 a year. That's based on having a pretty efficient EV, really, that does about 4 miles per kilowatt hour. It'd be about £1,770 in fuel for a diesel car like the Golf, assuming 55 miles per gallon. But that's not the whole story, of course, because people using cars for business do get savings in benefit in kind tax. So based on a £40,000 car, a basic rate taxpayer would be paying around £1,200 extra for the diesel in a year compared to £240 for the EV, thanks to this benefit in kind tax discount that you get with EVs. But this is a worst case scenario. I've also used a Golf as an example of a diesel, but things get very expensive very quickly if you use a less efficient diesel or a more polluting one, of course. Then you end up paying much more tax, thousands in fact. But I'm trying to be fair, and I'm trying to use a rough equivalent of a 4 mile per kilowatt hour EV to a diesel that does roughly the same. My example is someone who's purely charging at very expensive rapid chargers, which is not really likely. If you don't have a driveway, then you'd hopefully have access to slow chargers near you that you can charge overnight. Or maybe there's an office that you go to and you can charge there, or whatever. So just relying on public charging, especially rapid charging that's very expensive, would be a bit unusual, I think. So there's a lot of whataboutery going on with these figures, I know, because if you can, like most people, charge at home overnight for 2 pence per mile, then you'd cut the cost down significantly, and an EV would be cheaper to run. Now, it's all complicated, and I would encourage you to look into it yourselves, because everyone's situation is different. And how many people do 15,000 miles a year? Not many. But I understand that there will be a lot of people that look at this new tax rule and think that switching to an EV isn't worth the perceived hassle. The government are willingly penalising people who can't charge at home, which is stupid, because the point of this road tax is to claw back money, mainly from people who are using their home electricity. We're going slightly off topic here, because the main problem really is the public charging costs, and it's not the road tax. But it illustrates my point that the government should be focused on other things before tackling the tax, if I were in charge. EV drivers are, in the main, happy to pay their way, provided it's fair. And I actually think pay per mile is pretty fair in principle, provided cars all pay in the same way. What if you do like we do and you do thousands of miles driving down to Europe every year. We'll have to pay about £50 extra a year in this eVED, even though we're using European roads. We're not using the roads in this country that apparently this eVED will help repair. That's a bit annoying, although it's obviously not enough to stop us from driving down to Europe, although it highlights one way that pay per mile perhaps may not be ideal. Taxation is complex, but EVs are a unique issue and it requires a holistic approach, I think. So for what it's worth, here's what I think the government should do. Level the playing field. People at home can charge their cars cheaply. Anyone relying on public charging pays a fortune in the UK, and it can be more expensive than diesel. So reduce public charging VAT to 5% to match home electricity. And that's something that all the charging networks have been going on about for ages and ages and ages. So this is not a new thing. They've got so many costs with ridiculous standing charges and capacity charges, and then you've got obviously this VAT on top. That's what makes it so expensive to public charge in the UK. VAT reduction would be an easy first step that would save people money immediately. It would increase usage at public chargers, which would in turn drive greater investment, and more people would buy new and used EVs. And in fact, I spoke to Smart Charge and did a little interview with them. Watch that video if you've not seen it already, because we talk about the reasons that charging is so expensive in this country. So pay per mile. As I said, an MOT is an opportunity to check the mileage, although it's currently not legally required to have the mileage recorded on an MOT. So make it a requirement, tax all cars in the same way, and then it's fair. What about cars less than 3 years old that wouldn't ordinarily get an MOT? Well, they could still pay a flat rate, or perhaps nothing at all for a new EV, because that would be a great shot in the arm for automakers who committed to building EVs but have found them selling a little slower than they hoped. Not all automakers, by the way, but a few. So that would sell more new EVs. What about used EVs? Interest-free loans for used EVs, which is something that they do up in Scotland, and it's brilliant. You get up to 6 years of interest-free loans for households with an income lower than £50,000. So that would be fantastic for used EVs. So we would be selling more electric cars, which is better, I think, for everyone. And I think we should be in agreement that pollution is bad. So more EVs is a good thing in our towns and cities. In fact, I was in London the other day, and the difference in air quality is remarkable, thanks in a large part, of course, to the large number of EVs they've got there. So our end result should still be to get more of us driving EVs, but we still need incentives to get people thinking about EVs. 98.3% of all the vehicles sold in Norway are EVs. That's full EVs, not hybrids. Now, Norway achieved this with massive incentives. No VAT on EVs, it's 25% VAT on ICE cars. ICE cars with higher purchase tax, lower road tax on EVs, and more. And a lot of you may be thinking, yes, but Norway are rich. And yes, they are, partly because of all the oil and gas they export, which is ironic. What Norway have done is fantastic, and surely that's going to improve the public health in Norway over time. This change in road tax does nothing to alleviate the fear many people have that EVs are more expensive. Road tax should be fair and consistent, but EVs should still be much cheaper to own. Many people don't care about the environmental benefits, or to be fair, if they do, they can't afford the perceived higher upfront cost of an EV. The EV market has had really impressive growth in the UK, in part because they're so cheap to run for anyone with a driveway, and most people do have a driveway in the UK. But we need them to be cheap for everyone, and this new road tax from the government is, I think, massively misguided, and it will do enormous harm to the car industry and public health, since tailpipe emissions will go down much, much slower. However, although they've announced this as part of the budget, is actually the start of a consultation which will end on the 18th of March 2026. So things might change. They're asking for opinions. So now's your opportunity to tell them what you think. Click the link below. And as I also said before, this is due to happen in 2028, and a lot will change before then. And the government have been known to U-turn from time to time. The next general election will come in August 2029, And if they want to shout about their green credentials to get re-elected, I'd be really surprised if this exists in its current form. Obviously, what this has done is it's thrown a spanner in the works. It's caused even more confusion and uncertainty for EV drivers and the industry as a whole, which we just don't need. So what do you think about all of this? I would love to know your thoughts, whether you've got an EV or you don't, or you were thinking about getting an EV and you're not now, or whatever. Tell me in the comments. Do you support the government? There we go. I would love to hear about that. Are you in the government? I would love to know as well. I just think that the government are so short-sighted here, and the amount of confusion it's going to cause is a really bad thing. Anyway, what do I know? I'm not in charge. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please press the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of other videos, and I'll be back very soon. Bye for now.